what we want as Bolivia, and I think all want, is to have an agreement that allows us two things. First, to stabilize the increment in the temperature in something around 1 degree or 1.5 degrees, so that the temperature in the century doesn't increase more. Because that will mean that we will have less natural disasters than we would have if the temperature rises to 2, 3, or 4. Why we don't support the idea of the 2 degrees? Because the report of the IPCC establishes that the 2-degree scenario has a 50% of chance that things can go in a very bad way. A 50% of chance that things can go in a very bad way, it's something that we think that as humanity cannot take that risk. We said it before, nobody of us would send our grandchildren in a plane that has 50% of chances to land on the other side, so we must lower the risk. IPCC says that between 25 to 30% of the biodiversity would be in danger with 2 degrees. Of course, in a scenario of 3, 4, 5 degrees can be even worse than that, much worse than that. Many island states are going to be beneath the seas, our glaciers are going to disappear in the Andean region, but also in the Himalayas, and so on. Equity and the possibility and the right of development for developing countries. There is a historical responsibility in what we are seeing. For around 250 years, around 76% of all the greenhouse gas emissions that are in the atmosphere have come from developed countries. So now that we all have to try to lower down as much as possible the greenhouse gas emissions, we have to take into account this common but differential responsibility. Our position is developed countries have signed the Kyoto Protocol, have accepted that there is a historical responsibility, so they should take the lead and they should make very big cuts in their emissions. We as Bolivia say those cuts should be 50% taking into account the levels of 1990, done in a domestic way, without market mechanism, without offset mechanism. Why should it be so strong? In order to give space to the development of developing countries, in order to allow a more equitable distribution of the atmospheric space. 20% of the population colonizes 80% of the atmospheric space. It's a different kind of colonization because it's a colonization of greenhouse gas emissions, but that means that this stops the ability of, or restrains the ability of others to occupy that space without putting in danger the whole system, without putting in danger the whole planet. So the Climate Change Convention was based on the principle of historical responsibility, which is very clear in this convention that has been ratified by everybody, including even the United States, is that developing countries are going to reduce their emissions. Developing countries have to do their part, but in order to do their part, they should receive finance and transfer of technology of developing countries. Say, that is what the convention says. Now, where is the finance? Where is the transfer of technology?
There are two paths. There's the Copenhagen Conference, held in December of 2009 and dominated by a group of countries led by the United States, and the Copenhagen Accord, which utterly failed to impose restrictions or meaningful conditions. And it didn't set an aggregate goal for the developed countries. It just proposed as the ambassador explained, voluntary reductions made no mention of climate debt. The U.S. proposed a non-binding $100 billion over 10 years. And just to also put that into another perspective, the U.S. military budget this year actually is a total of $1.5 trillion. So $10 billion a year isn't even 1% of U.S. military spending per year. And it's less than half of 1% of the GDP. And 50% of this financing, as was explained, was to come from carbon markets, which is a bogus, speculative market mechanism that actually would be bought and sold on the international stock market. Totally speculative entity. There was no mention of mechanisms for consulting populations, no mention of indigenous peoples, no mention of the rights of Mother Earth, and no mention of structural causes of climate change. So in essence, it accomplished nothing. It was outrageous and a crushing disappointment for the 10,000 environmental activists who had made such an effort to attend. And we cannot allow Copenhagen to become the basis of future climate conferences or the climate debate. We need to publicize and campaign for the real goals set in Cochibamba in April with the People's Agreement. People's Agreement of 31,000 environmental activists, organizations, and indigenous organizations accomplished in Cochibamba. They limited global temperature increase, as was explained in the present century, to 1 degree. They demanded that the United States ratify the Kyoto Protocol and said that developed countries have a climate debt toward the developing countries, toward Mother Earth, and toward future generations. And the debt should come from public funds, not linked to speculative carbon market. They rejected the carbon market. Cochibamba proposed sustainable models of agricultural production and food sovereignty. And they proposed the adoption of legally binding mechanisms to guarantee compliance with international treaties and the creation of a climate and environmental justice tribunal. Wouldn't that be a tremendous step? They proposed a world referendum on climate change. Wouldn't that empower the people? And they also put forth that the only way to defend human rights is to recognize the rights of Mother Earth and the rights of all to a clean environment. And I think something that was so important, they put forth the structural causes of climate change, the capitalist system, the maximizing of profit, exploitation and commodification of nature. At Cochibamba, it was declared that financing should be set aside for climate change in an amount greater than that which the developed countries currently budget for defense, war, and security spending. Now, the Pentagon is today the largest institutional user of petroleum products and energy globally. And yet, the Pentagon has a blanket exemption from all international climate agreements, including Kyoto. It's not counted against U.S. greenhouse gas limits and not included in any count. U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. All equipment used in 1,000 U.S. bases around the world. All equipment used in 6,000 military facilities in the United States. All NATO operations. And all U.S. aircraft carriers, jet aircraft, weapon testing, training, and military sales. This is an environmental war that is also waged at home with massive pollution in the U.S. and there are many, many organizations that focus on the greatest illegal U.S. today, which is the U.S. military. It's important in recognizing the work in Cochibamba that we more and more see how we can do everything we can to publicize and aid the People's Agreement, to build strong support for that agreement and show that it's always a grassroots people's movement that move history forward. When we make demands on powerful rulers of the globe, we can change history and desperately with the question of climate change.